it is a tragedy steeped in irony.
The 5 people on board the Titan sub perished when the tourist vessel suffered a catastrophic implosion.
There's never been an implosion of a deep-sea submersible during a dive before.
OceanGate shouldn't have been doing what it was doing. I think that's pretty clear.
Hello and welcome to the Nexus. Today we're taking a closer look at what happened to the Titan, the submersible that imploded, killing all 5 people on board. This week we found out that the passengers were listening to music in their final moments. We'll be hearing from Bart Kemper, an engineer who warned OceanGate about the Titan back in 2018. But first, let's find out more about Stockton Rush, the man at the centre of this unprecedented and tragic scandal.
Hi, my name is Stockton Rush. I'm the CEO and founder of OceanGate. Let's take a look at Titan.
Almost exactly a year ago, Stockton Rush showed off his sub to Canadian reporters. It had already made a handful of trips down to the Titanic, and Rush was in confident mood.
And it's meant for a 16-year-old to throw it around, and super durable. We keep a couple of spares on board just in case.
And this is the Titan now, nothing more than debris recovered from the ocean floor. Among the wreckage, the remains of the 5 people aboard its final voyage, including 2 billionaires. 58-year-old Hamish Harding and 48-year-old Shahzada Dawood, accompanied by his 19-year-old son, Suleiman, whose mother had given him her place on the sub.
So it was supposed to be Shahzada and I going down. But then I stepped back and gave the space to Suleiman because he really wanted to go.
Also on board, the 77-year-old explorer Paul-Henri Naguiolet, and of course 61-year-old Rush himself, who was piloting the sub. Descended from 2 of America's founding fathers, Richard Stockton and Benjamin Rush, he had high ambitions. His dream of becoming an astronaut, perhaps even one of the first people on Mars, was ended by his poor eyesight. He turned his attention to the deep sea instead, pioneering private ocean exploration. A trip on board his Titan submersible would cost $250,000, taking the super-rich to the wreckage of the Titanic. That was the supposedly unsinkable ship, at the time the world's largest, which hit an iceberg on its maiden voyage in 1912. The wreckage lies in a remote part of the North Atlantic, around 700 kilometers off the coast of Newfoundland, Canada, and about 2,000 kilometers from its ultimate destination, New York. Clients take an 8-day trip, setting sail from the Canadian coast on a chartered support ship, and from there, depending on the weather, 4 of the days would be used to dive to the Titanic. The wreckage lies almost 4 kilometers below the surface, well below the distance a person, a military submarine, or even a whale can dive to. Such a depth requires an incredibly well-designed machine to withstand the pressure, about 380 times the pressure we experience on the surface, equivalent to having the Eiffel Tower pressing down on it. Deep-sea experts warned that Stockton Rush had avoided certifying the craft because of numerous flaws.
There are only 10 vehicles in the whole world that can go 4,000 meters or deeper, and all of them are certified, except the Titan.
The body was mostly made from carbon fiber. Rush claimed he had bought it from Boeing at a big discount because it was past its shelf life for use in airplanes, something not recommended by experts, including the Hollywood director James Cameron, who has dived down to the Titanic wreckage 30 times in a self-designed sub.
So we always understood that this was the wrong material for submersible hulls because with each pressure cycle, you can have progressive damage. So it's quite insidious because you may have a number of successful dives, which is what happened here, and then have it fail later.
And the nose cone was made from titanium, despite expert advice not to mix the 2 materials.
I'd like to be remembered as an innovator. I think it was General MacArthur said, "You're remembered for the rules you break." And I've broken some rules to make this. I think I've broken them with logic and good engineering behind me. The carbon fiber and titanium, there's a rule you don't do that. Well, I did.
According to a former employee who sued the company, the single window in the craft was only rated to 1,300 meters, around a third of the depth necessary to reach the shipwreck. Passengers were locked in by 18 bolts, hand-tightened by someone on the outside of the vehicle.
It seems like a lot of the way you made this is by taking off-the-shelf parts and sort of MacGyvering them together.
Yeah, pretty much.
Does that not raise anybody's eyebrows in the industry?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, no, I'm definitely an outlier. There were a lot of rules out there that didn't make engineering sense to me. There's certain things that you want to be buttoned down, and that's the pressure vessel. Once the pressure vessel is, you're certain it's not going to collapse on everybody, everything else can fail.
Mr. Rush had been warned his submarine was unsafe and could damage the reputation of the entire field of deep-sea exploration. 5 years ago, in an email exchange with Rob McCallum, a leading deep-sea expert, Mr. Rush wrote that he had grown tired of industry players who tried to use a safety argument to stop innovation. We have heard the baseless cries of, "You are going to kill someone," way too often. I take this as a serious personal insult. Mr. McCallum replied, "I think you are potentially placing yourself and your clients in a dangerous dynamic. Ironically, in your race to the Titanic, you are mirroring that famous catch cry, 'She is unsinkable.'" But Stockton Rush pressed on regardless, ending in a tragedy we now know the story of all too well. Well, earlier we spoke to John Copley, an eminent marine biologist who 10 years ago descended 5,000 meters into the Caribbean Sea on a scientific expedition. That's considerably deeper than the Titanic. We asked him how he would explain what happened to the Titan.
What happened to the Titan submersible is unprecedented. There's never before been a deep diving submersible that has imploded during a dive. And these vehicles are not new, okay? The first vehicle that carried people into the deep ocean did so nearly a century ago, in 1930. And over those many decades, these kinds of vehicles have taken far more people into the depths of the ocean than the number of people who've ever been into space. And no vehicle has ever imploded before. So it was a completely unprecedented incident. The investigation that's being led by the Coast Guard will now have to establish exactly what happened. And there are certainly 3 areas that they will be investigating. What was different about the Titan, first of all, is its shape. So most of the vehicles that carry people into the deep ocean, the part that carries the people is a sphere, because that round shape means that the pressure is spread evenly around the hull, which is the best shape for pressure. But the Titan was different. For the Titan, they split the sphere in half and inserted a tube in between the 2 halves to make more room for more people, because most of these vehicles only carry 2 or 3 people, and to remain as a sphere and carry more people, the sphere has to get bigger and bigger, and that makes it too big and too heavy to get on and off of a ship. So the Titan had a different shape, but that said, there is one vehicle in history that had that kind of tube shape that did go to these depths, but its hull was made out of aluminium. So as well as shape, they'll also be investigating the materials that the hull was made of. And that middle tube of the Titan's hull was made out of carbon fiber, which has never been used before for the hull of a deep diving submersible. So there'll be a lot of investigation around what happened to that material and whether that was what failed, but also the joins, how the different parts of the hull were joined together. So you've got the 2 hemispheres made of titanium on either end. You've got the carbon fiber tube. The joins between them are really crucial at withstanding pressure. And again, the Titan was different because one of those joins effectively had to be opened up on the front end every time just to get people in and out. Normally, there's a separate hatch for people to go in and out of these vehicles. So again, the design was different. So all those places where the design was different will be what the teams will be investigating to understand why it imploded, because that has never happened before.
Well, let's bring in our panel now, and we have Bart Kemper with us. He's a submarine engineer who warned OceanGate years ago that the design of the Titan was seriously flawed. We also have the submarine recovery expert, Frank Owen. And finally, we have the maritime geophysicist, Rob Lato. Welcome to all of you. Bart Kemper, if I may start with you. You co-wrote a letter, along with the Marine Technology Society, to Stockton Rush 5 years ago, stating that you and the others were worried that OceanGate's experimental approach could lead to catastrophic outcomes with serious consequences for the entire industry. What was it at the time, 5 years ago now, that worried you and your fellow experts from the Marine Technology Society?
Well, the primary thing was that OceanGate decided not to go with codes and standards, to not go with classification societies. This is the due diligence that we expect, this standard of care. All these codes and standards that have been developed for submersibles has been done with decades and decades of experience. Classification societies have trained engineers that work with the client and get their designs validated, even if there's novel items. So that's when you don't do that, then all you have is self-certification, and self-certification in any engineering endeavor is questionable at best. And if you are putting people's lives at risk, it's unacceptable. You have to do something beyond that.
And what happened to the letter?
Well, the issue with the letter was that the Marine Technology Society is just that, a technology society, much like American Society of Mechanical Engineers or any other things. If they start getting into trying to regulate how businesses operate, they run afoul in the United States with antitrust laws. You can't operate that way. However, the act of the Will Conan, who was the chairman, bringing these people together and having these very pointed discussions, when the letter did not go forward, resulted in Will Conan and other individuals going to have a face-to-face with OceanGate and trying to resolve some issues. Some issues they understood, they agreed with, and they changed how they were operating.
I'll get
Other
to that.
ones they did not.
I'll get to that in a second, but why wasn't the letter actually delivered to Stockton Rush and OceanGate?
Because it was on Marine Technology Society letterhead, and that organization cannot, because of antitrust laws and other issues with that, they cannot get in and try to regulate how businesses operate. So it was outside their charter and could have been a source of legal problems.
Okay, so they changed their mind and they decided to have a face-to-face. Some members went to see Stockton Rush. How did that meeting go down?
The way the meeting worked out is they agreed to some things. They agreed to make the waiver much more explicit, to make it very clear this is not a tourist sub. There are tourist subs. This is not a tourist sub. This is an experimental, similar to the FAA experimental aircraft, where you get into it, you use it with assuming full risk, that it has that is just exactly what it says, experimental. So that part was changed, and they made it more clear in their advertising. They made it more clear in their agreements, and they changed their way of operating. Instead of saying passengers, that they were going to have people who would come on as mission specialists and be trained to do specific tasks for that dive mission.
Ultimately, they didn't change the design of Titan enough to prevent the implosion.
That's apparent at this time. As it's been said by others, there's ongoing investigations right now with multiple jurisdictions, multiple nations are involved.
Okay, let's talk about the likely cause of the implosion then, which the investigation is looking into. David Lockridge, OceanGate's former director of marine operations, he warned that the Titan was not safe, and he particularly looked at, or rather pointed out, the window, and said that the window was not certified to go to those depths of 4,000 meters. Perhaps it could only go to, say, half that, or perhaps less. If I may ask, Bart, what is your suspicion? What went wrong? What was the weak point of the vessel?
There are multiple weak points, one of which is the window. The window is always an issue because it's made out of acrylic. Acrylic as a material is just what it sounds like, acrylic. It sounds like what we use every day. It's much weaker than steel, much weaker than titanium. However, it is used in submarines that go to the deepest parts of the ocean. It's all about the design for that window. So if they did not design it per the correct codes, and they exist and they've been proven, then they're doing something that has too much risk, has uncertainty. The other one, which has come up a lot, is the interface between the titanium and the cylinder. The cylinder is made out of carbon fiber. That interface, which is glued, is a way to do it, but it's not considered the best way to do things like that. It doesn't mean it was wrong inherently. If things would have been fully tested and proven out, and there are processes for this. Verification and validation is a very specific methodology where same thing that's used in a space program, same thing that's used in medical devices. The verification and validation methodology is a way to look at novel items and get them through class or some other jurisdiction. None of that was used. And that, again, goes back to why, without knowledge of the specifics of the design, so many people, including myself, said this is wrong. I mean, just the fact that you are ignoring the wealth of work that's been done over decades to develop codes and standards, and you decide they're too conservative or this is not the right methodology, that raised the flags.
Let's stay with certification. And Frank Owen, you were actually involved in certifying another of OceanGate's submersibles, the Antipodes. Tell us about the process of certifying it and why they would allow you to certify that one, but not Titan.
Well, it wasn't owned by OceanGate at that stage. It was owned by a small company in southern New Zealand, out of Otago, and the New Zealand Maritime Safety Authority required that not only was it materially certified, and I wasn't involved in the material certification of it, but I was involved in auditing the safety case because it was going to take some fee-paying tourists to the bottom. It's worth noting that, of course, it was operating within the jurisdiction of a nation, and Stockton Rush was very deliberately, according to the article I recently read in the New York Times, deliberately operating on the high seas or under the high seas outside of the jurisdiction of any country.
So why do you think that Stockton Rush was avoiding having the Titan certified?
He had he's quite publicly had said that innovation was the key to this, and he was taking an innovative approach, and he didn't want to be bogged down by the time wasting, and that it would take them so many years to get their heads around the material he was using and the concepts he was implementing to make this not worthwhile.
So time was an issue, but also money. Is it an expensive business to have a vessel certified?
Oh, it is expensive. There's no question of that. It takes a lot of people a lot of time. But I was involved also in the certification of Remora. It was a remotely operated rescue vehicle, going nowhere near the depth of this activity. But that vehicle was designed, built, and certified within 23 weeks, and it had never been done before to have a remotely operated vehicle as a submarine rescue vehicle.
Bart, we've talked about the Titan, but let's talk about Stockton Rush, the owner, co-founder of OceanGate. You met him on a number of occasions. Would you say he was egotistical or cavalier?
I met him in a very social situation amongst the submarine community at Underwater Intervention. It's an annual conference, and he was a charming person. I only had passing social contact with him. I didn't get more involved with the situation with OceanGate until 2017, 2018, and I wasn't meeting with him at that time, but I did meet him at other times. He's a charming entrepreneur type person, not unlike other people in the business and in other businesses.
I mean, we heard about David Lockridge earlier, and we've just seen this email across our desks. It says from David Lockridge, "I'm so worried he kills himself and others in the quest to boost his ego." It's a small community, as you say. Is there a lot of competition in the community?
Not there's no real competition to kill yourself, and there's no real competition to be the first to do things. There is in the larger sense, but everyone wants to go home. Everyone wants to do it safe. It's worth noting there is 9 or 10 other submersibles that can reach the depth of the Titanic, and everyone except Stockton's is done to class.
And why?
The whole idea that go ahead.
Well, and why do you think that is?
Because it's the right way of doing things. The argument.
No. I mean, why do you think Stockton was happy and comfortable with being this strange sort of maverick outsider?
I really cannot. I didn't know him that well. He was an entrepreneur. I mean, the thing is, until it imploded, until it failed, on the surface he was succeeding. He was living out his dream. He had multiple dives in the submersible where people said it was unsafe, and he says, I've done multiple dives. What more do you want? So until it went bad, on the surface, unless you had insider knowledge or unless you could look at things as a technical person and have concerns just by eyeballing it, he seemed like any other charming entrepreneur, and he believed in what he did. Bottom line, he went down and he believed in it. So this was not a case where he was trying to sell something.
Well, that's true.
And have someone else take the risk.
Yes, other people have made the comment that he did believe so much in his technology that he was willing to go down with it. I mean, in your letter, it does say that his claims that Titan would meet or exceed safety standards were misleading to the public and breached the industry-wide professional code of conduct. So you were certainly ringing the alarm bell back in 2018. Rob Larter, if I can just turn to your expertise. I understand you've been somewhat dragged into the media coverage of this story because you have very specific skills in seismic and acoustic work. Can you just explain how you were invited by various media organizations to participate in the analysis of this situation?
So I initially responded to a call from the Science Media Centre in the UK when it was being reported that sounds had been heard that might come from the submersible, and they were simply asking how could these sounds be detected and would you be able to locate the source of them? So I said, yes, absolutely you would if you could record them at enough locations. And if you had an object somewhere in the mid-water column, you'd be able to locate its depth by a ghost echo, which would be reflected off the seafloor or off the sea surface.
But it turned out that those sounds were either just rumors or certainly misleading. They had nothing to do with the Titan.
Absolutely, it was a rumor that, was spurious, and the mysterious thing to me now is that once the debris was found, the US Coast Guard then said, oh yes, our acoustic network detected a loud bang at the time that communication was lost, and I wonder why this information was not distributed more widely at an earlier stage.
Well, it's a very important point, isn't it? Because the implosion happened 1 hour and 45 minutes into the dive, which is when communications was lost. And had the US Coast Guard, reported that it had detected a sound that was consistent with an implosion, then countries and private companies may not have mobilized in the enormous way they did.
Yes, and sorry, I think I said the US Coast Guard. It was the US Navy that said they detected it, but they say they passed that information to the Coast Guard, but it clearly went no further. And yes, I think the third parties who mobilise ships and very valuable assets will probably be asking why they weren't told this.
Frank Owen, as a recovery expert yourself, I can see you nodding along to that point. It was a big exercise, wasn't it?
It was, but if I was to put myself in the shoes of the US Navy, I would be saying, yes, we heard an anomaly. We can't be sure that it was actually the implosion. Sure, the times were coincident with the loss of communication, but until there's some physical or visual confirmation of the wreck of this submersible, then you need to keep searching, because there's no one would thank you if at the end of 96 hours you suddenly discovered that the submersible was floating just below the surface and could have been found had the forces been looking for it. The other point is that it was going to take that time anyway to mobilize these deep diving ROVs that could get down there. They not only had to get to St. John's, but they then had to mobilize to the ship and then sail a day and a half or so to get out to the wreck of the Titanic.
Bart, one last quick question for you. In your letter, you warned Stockton Rush that he could damage the entire industry, which had a very enviable safety record until now. Has he done that?
It's too soon to tell. However, the narrative did change from the beginning, where they were calling this a tourist sub and then changed it to an experimental sub. That hopefully has educated the public that this was not the same as the tourist subs that operate safely for decades in various parts of the world. So that's one aspect. And the other thing is there has been a proliferation of smaller subs in the last 2 decades that has been used not just for tourism, but also for research. And that also has been part of the safety record. Again, we're hoping that the broadcast such as this, that is going into details, helps people see the difference between the designs and the process that gets them certified.
Bart Kemper, Frank Owen, and Rob Larter, thank you all very much for your contributions to the Nexus today. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. If you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Till next week then, goodbye.